The ceramic teacup shattered against the marble floor, a sound like a gunshot in the hushed kitchen. Josephine Jones froze, her hand still curved in the shape of the handle that had been there a moment before. She closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable reprimand. That cup was older than the empire itself. The head cook's voice was cold as the winter that gripped the imperial palace. If His Imperial Majesty hears of this, His Imperial Majesty won't hear of it. The voice came from the doorway, and Josephine's eyes flew open. The Duchess of Lenborough stood there, resplendent in evening attire, pearls gleaming at her throat. "I'll take responsibility." The girl was merely responding to my request for tea. The Duchess swept from the kitchen as quickly as she had arrived, leaving Josephine to clean up the shards with trembling hands. 3 months in the imperial kitchens, and still her nerves betrayed her at every turn. The other servants avoided her gaze as she worked, this strange girl with her foreign accent and second-hand uniform that hung loose on her thin frame. She had come to the capital with nothing but her mother's recipe book and a letter of introduction from a distant relative who served as an undersecretary to the Minister of Trade. The imperial kitchens were always short-staffed during the bitter winter months when many servants returned to their families in the countryside, and Josephine had been hired with barely a glance at her papers. Later that night, exhausted from 14 hours of kitchen work, she sat on her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, tracing the faded handwriting in her mother's recipe book. The familiar script was all she had left of home, of the small seaside town where her father had been the local physician until the fever took both her parents within a week of each other. A knock at her door startled her. "The Duchess requests your presence," said a footman, not bothering to hide his curiosity at why a kitchen girl would receive such a summons. The Duchess was alone in her chambers, a stack of papers before her. "Close the door," she said without looking up. "Your name is Josephine, yes?" "Yes, Your Grace." "I've been watching you, Josephine. You're not like the others." The Duchess finally raised her eyes. "Your accent, Northern Province." "Yes, Your Grace." "The coastal region. And yet you read medical texts when you think no one is looking." The Duchess gestured to a chair. "Sit. Please." Josephine perched on the edge of the seat, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "The Empire is at war, though His Majesty's ministers assure the public all is well." The Duchess's voice lowered. "Our enemies have grown bold. 3 attempts on the Emperor in as many months. I don't understand what this has to do with me, Your Grace. The Imperial taster fell ill this morning. Poison is suspected." The Duchess's eyes were sharp. "We need someone who understands the properties of herbs and medicines. Someone unremarkable, who can move through the palace without notice." "You wish me to risk my life tasting the Emperor's food?" Josephine couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "I wish you to help save the Empire," the Duchess corrected. "And in return, I will ensure you receive the education your father would have wanted for you." How did she know about her father? Josephine's heart pounded in her chest. "When would I begin?" "Tomorrow morning. You'll be transferred to the Imperial kitchen. No one will know your true purpose except myself and the Imperial physician." The Duchess handed her a small book. "Memorize this tonight. It contains descriptions of common poisons and their effects." As Josephine took the book, the weight of it seemed to symbolize the burden she was accepting. "And if I refuse?" "Then you return to the regular kitchens, and we find someone else." The Duchess's tone softened slightly. "But I don't think you will refuse. Your eyes betray you, Josephine Jones. You crave purpose." The Imperial kitchen was a world apart from the servants' kitchen where Josephine had worked before. Here, a dozen chefs moved in perfect coordination, preparing elaborate dishes for the Emperor and his court. The head chef, Master Renaud, eyed her suspiciously when she was presented as his new assistant. "I requested someone with experience," he muttered. "Miss Jones has a particular talent for identifying herbs and spices," the Duchess replied smoothly. "Her skills will prove valuable." Josephine was assigned to prepare the Emperor's morning tea and toast, a task seemingly simple but fraught with protocol. The china must be warmed to precisely the right temperature, the tea steeped for exactly 3.5 minutes, the toast cut into perfect triangles. Each morning, in a small antechamber adjacent to the imperial kitchen, Josephine would taste each item before it was arranged on the silver tray. A minute amount of each food or drink, just enough to detect any poison that might be present. The imperial physician, Dr. Fincher, would watch her carefully, ready to administer antidotes if necessary. For 2 weeks, she performed this duty without incident, never catching so much as a glimpse of Emperor Zachary Carswell, the man whose life she was protecting. She knew his preferences intimately, the precise shade of golden brown he preferred for his toast, the exact temperature of his tea, and yet he remained an abstraction, a name on the daily menu cards. Until the morning she detected a faint, bitter undertaste in the Emperor's favorite orange marmalade. "Stop," she said sharply to the footman who was about to take the tray. Her tongue tingled unpleasantly, and she reached for the glass of milk that was always kept nearby, a simple remedy to dilute many common poisons. Dr. Fincher was at her side instantly. "What is it?" "The marmalade." "There's something wrong." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears as numbness spread from her tongue to her lips. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was the doctor's face, tight with alarm as he shouted for assistance. She awoke in an unfamiliar room, sunlight streaming through tall windows. The bed beneath her was soft as a cloud, the sheets finer than any she had ever touched. For a moment, she wondered if she had died and this was some afterlife her mother had never mentioned in her bedtime stories. "Ah, you're awake." It was Dr. Fincher, looking weary but relieved. "You gave us quite a scare, Miss Jones." "The Emperor," she began, her voice a harsh croak, "is quite safe, thanks to you." The doctor helped her sit up, offering a glass of water. The marmalade contained a rare poison from the eastern provinces. Slow-acting but ultimately fatal. "You saved his life." "How long have I been unconscious?" 3 days. The doctor checked her pulse. "Your recovery is remarkable. Most would still be bedridden for weeks." "Where am I?" She looked around at the opulent room. "The eastern wing of the palace. His Majesty ordered you brought here for treatment." The doctor seemed uncomfortable. "He has taken a personal interest in your recovery." Before she could ask more questions, the door opened, and the Duchess entered. She dismissed the doctor with a nod and sat beside Josephine's bed. "You've done well," she said simply. "Better than I dared hope." "The poison was in the marmalade," Josephine said. "But it came from the imperial kitchens." "That means yes. The traitor is someone with access to the Emperor's food." The Duchess's face was grim. "Someone trusted. What happens now?" "Now you continue your work, but with even greater caution." "And the Duchess hesitated." "His Majesty wishes to thank you personally once you've recovered." The thought filled Josephine with terror. "I wouldn't know what to say to an emperor." "Say little and listen much." The Duchess stood to leave. "That is always the safest course at court." 5 days later, deemed recovered enough by Dr. Fincher, Josephine returned to her duties in the imperial kitchen. The staff eyed her differently now, with a mixture of respect and wariness. Rumors of her illness and recovery in the palace proper had spread, though none knew the true reason for the Emperor's apparent favor. Master Renaud was particularly cold, his instructions to her clipped and impatient. "The Emperor has requested something special for this evening's meal," he announced to the kitchen staff. "A dish from the northern coastal region." His eyes fixed on Josephine. "Perhaps our newest edition might have suggestions." Put on the spot, Josephine thought quickly. "My mother had a recipe for seafood stew with saffron and white wine." It was simple but elegant. Master Renaud's lip curled. "Simple peasant food is hardly appropriate for His Imperial Majesty." "On the contrary," said a new voice from the doorway, "it sounds exactly what I've been craving." The entire kitchen fell to their knees as Emperor Zachary Carswell entered, flanked by 2 guards. Josephine dropped into a deep curtsy, her heart thundering in her chest. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, with sharp features and eyes the color of a winter sea. The weight of imperial rule showed in the slight lines around those eyes, the touch of silver at his temples. "Rise," he commanded, and the kitchen staff scrambled to their feet. His gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Josephine before addressing Master Renaud. "I should like to try this northern stew tonight. See that it's prepared according to the traditional recipe." As the Emperor turned to leave, he paused beside Josephine. "Walk with me, Miss Jones. I believe we have much to discuss." Acutely aware of the stares following them, Josephine fell into step beside the Emperor as he led her from the kitchens, through corridors she had never seen, to a small, sunlit garden enclosed within the palace walls. "This is my private garden," he said, dismissing the guards with a gesture. "Few are granted access." "It's beautiful, Your Majesty." And it was, even in winter, the garden held a stark beauty, with evergreens and winter-blooming flowers carefully tended. "I understand I owe you my life." His voice was different than she had imagined, softer, with a hint of the northern accent that had been trained out of most nobles. "I was only doing my duty, Your Majesty." Few would consider risking their life a simple duty. He studied her face. "The Duchess tells me you're the daughter of a physician." "Yes, Your Majesty." "From the northern province. And yet you work as a kitchen girl." He gestured to a stone bench. "Sit with me and tell me your story, Josephine Jones." Surprised by his use of her full name, she sat at the far end of the bench and haltingly told him of her parents' death, her journey to the capital, her hope of someday studying medicine as her father had. The Emperor listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed a surprising knowledge of the northern provinces. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I believe we can arrange for your medical studies," he said finally. "But I would ask something in return." Her heart sank. There was always a price, always something required in exchange for advancement. "What would you ask of me, Your Majesty?" "Continue your work as my taster, but also serve as my eyes and ears in the palace. Someone tried to poison me, Josephine, and I need to know who." It wasn't the request she had feared, but it was dangerous nonetheless. "I'm not trained as a spy, Your Majesty." "No, you're something far more valuable, someone overlooked, underestimated." He turned to face her fully. "Will you help me?" She thought of her father, who had taught her that healing sometimes required difficult choices. "Yes, Your Majesty. I will help you." "Good." He stood. "You'll continue your duties as before, but you'll report directly to me. Each evening, after my dinner, you'll bring me tea in my private study and tell me what you've observed." As he escorted her back toward the kitchens, he added quietly, "Trust no one completely, Josephine. Not even the Duchess." That night, she prepared the northern seafood stew according to her mother's recipe, despite Master Renaud's obvious disdain. When it was time to taste the Emperor's portion, she approached the task with even greater care than usual, searching for any hint of adulteration. The stew was clean, and Dr. Fincher nodded his approval. As the silver tray was carried away to the imperial dining room, Josephine felt a strange pride. A dish from her childhood, her mother's recipe, would tonight be eaten by the Emperor himself. Hours later, heart pounding, she carried a tray with a single cup of chamomile tea to the Emperor's private study. A guard checked the contents before allowing her to enter, then closed the door behind her. The study was warm, lit by a crackling fire and dozens of candles. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and maps were spread across a massive desk. The Emperor stood by the window, looking out at the night sky. "Your stew was excellent," he said without turning. "It reminded me of my childhood visits to the northern coast." "I'm glad it pleased you, Your Majesty." She set the tea on a small table. "What did you observe today?" Now he turned, fixing her with that intense gaze. She had spent the day watching and listening with new attention, and she reported everything: the whispered conversation between two kitchen boys about a late-night meeting, Master Renaud's unexplained absence during the preparation of the afternoon refreshments, the new delivery of spices that had arrived without the usual documentation. The Emperor listened carefully, asking occasional questions that revealed how much thought he had given to the attempt on his life. When she finished, he nodded slowly. You have good instincts, Josephine. Continue watching Master Renaud. His family has ties to the southern provinces, where rebellion has been brewing. As she turned to leave, he added, the chamomile tea, was it your choice? Yes, Your Majesty. I thought it might help you sleep. A faint smile touched his lips. My mother used to make me chamomile tea. Thank you. Over the following weeks, Josephine settled into her strange dual role. By day, she worked in the imperial kitchens, tasting the emperor's food and quietly observing the staff. By night, she reported her findings to the emperor over cups of tea that she selected based on his mood or the demands of his day. Sometimes their conversations were brief and formal. Other nights, particularly when he was troubled by affairs of state, they would talk for hours. He asked about her life, her dreams, her opinions on books she had read from the palace library that he arranged for her to access. In turn, she learned about the burdens he carried, a restless empire, treacherous nobles, foreign powers awaiting any sign of weakness. He spoke of his lonely childhood as the heir apparent, raised by distant tutors after his mother's death in childbirth and his father's subsequent withdrawal from family life. Sometimes I think the assassination attempts are merely a symptom, he confessed one night, staring into the fire. The empire is sick at its heart. My father's policies created deep divisions that I've struggled to heal. Perhaps that's why you survived the poison, she suggested quietly. You're needed to finish that work. He looked at her with surprise, then thoughtfulness. Perhaps. Though I believe I survived because a quiet kitchen girl was paying attention when others were not. Spring arrived, melting the snow from the palace gardens. Josephine's education had begun in earnest, with tutors coming to the palace 3 mornings a week to instruct her in anatomy, botany, and basic surgical techniques. The Duchess of Lenborough had arranged everything as promised, though her manner toward Josephine had grown increasingly cool as the Emperor's interest in the former kitchen girl became apparent. You're playing a dangerous game, the Duchess warned her one afternoon as they walked in the public gardens. His Majesty's attention is flattering, but temporary. When he tires of you, or when he must inevitably make a political marriage, you will be discarded. His Majesty values my service, nothing more, Josephine replied, though her heart gave a painful twist at the words. The Duchess laughed softly. My dear girl, I've been at court for 30 years. I recognize the signs. Be careful that your heart doesn't lead you to ruin. That evening, Josephine brought the Emperor a tea of lemon balm and mint, hoping it would refresh him after a day of difficult meetings with foreign ambassadors. She found him standing before a painting of a woman with his same sea-colored eyes, his mother, she realized. The Duchess of Lenborough tells me I should be seeking a bride, he said without preamble. She has helpfully provided a list of suitable candidates from noble houses across the empire. Josephine's hands trembled slightly as she set down the tea tray. That seems a prudent concern for the imperial succession, Your Majesty. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. Is that your physician's opinion, or your personal one? I don't believe I should have a personal opinion on such matters, Your Majesty. And yet I find I want it nonetheless. He stepped closer. These past months, you have become the only person in the palace who speaks to me as a man, not merely as an emperor. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. I have always tried to show proper respect, yes, you maintain all the formal proprieties. A smile touched his lips. And yet you argue with me about books, challenge my views on policy, and prescribe teas based on your assessment of my well-being rather than my stated preferences. Put that way, her behavior seemed terribly presumptuous. I apologize if I've overstepped, don't. His voice was suddenly fierce. Never apologize for treating me as human. He took her hand, an unprecedented familiarity that sent a shock through her system. I've come to depend on our evenings together, Josephine. More than I should, perhaps. Before she could respond, the door opened and the imperial secretary entered with a stack of documents requiring immediate attention. The emperor released her hand and stepped back, his public mask sliding back into place. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow, he said, his tone once again formal. Thank you for the tea, Miss Jones. But there was no discussion the next day, nor the day after. A diplomatic crisis erupted with a neighboring kingdom, and the emperor was closeted with his ministers for long hours. Josephine continued her duties, tasting his meals and sending tea to his meetings, but their private conversation ceased. In their absence, rumors flourished. Court whispers suggested the emperor was considering marriage proposals from 3 different royal houses. Other gossip claimed he had a secret mistress from among the nobility. Josephine tried to ignore the speculation, focusing instead on her studies and her ongoing surveillance of the kitchen staff. Her vigilance was rewarded when she noticed Master Renaud receiving a small packet from one of the vegetable suppliers, a transaction conducted behind the storeroom when he thought no one was watching. That evening, though she had not been summoned, she requested an audience with the emperor on the pretense of an urgent medical matter. She was shown to his study, where he looked up from his documents with surprise that quickly turned to concern. "What's happened?" he asked, dismissing his secretary. She told him about Master Renaud and the mysterious packet, watching his expression grow grave. "You were right to bring this to me immediately." He crossed to a cabinet and withdrew a small key. "This may be the evidence we've been waiting for. I'll have the Imperial Guard search his quarters tonight." He hesitated, then added more softly, "I've missed our conversations, Josephine." "As have I, Your Majesty." The words escaped before she could censor them. "The crisis with Westmeria has demanded all my attention." He stepped closer. "But it's nearly resolved. And there are important matters we left unfinished." The door opened before she could respond, and the captain of the Imperial Guard entered with a bow. "Your Majesty, the Westmerian envoy has arrived early. He awaits your pleasure in the diplomatic reception room." The emperor's jaw tightened in frustration. "Very well. And Captain, arrange for a discreet search of Master Renaud's quarters immediately. Miss Jones will provide the details." The search revealed not only poison in Master Renaud's possession but also coded correspondence with rebel leaders in the southern provinces. He was arrested that night, and under questioning implicated several other conspirators within the palace staff. Josephine found herself hailed as a hero for the second time, though most still did not know her role as the emperor's taster. The Duchess of Lenborough congratulated her publicly but cornered her in a corridor afterward. "You've served your purpose admirably," she said, her voice silky. "Now might be the time to consider your future. I have contacts at a medical academy in the western province who would welcome you as a student." "You wish me to leave the capital?" Josephine asked, suddenly understanding. "I think it would be best for everyone concerned." The Duchess's smile didn't reach her eyes. "His Majesty will be announcing his betrothal at the summer solstice ball. Your continued presence would be awkward." The news struck Josephine like a physical blow, though she maintained her composure. "I see. Thank you for your concern, Your Grace." That night, she brought lavender tea to the emperor's study, determined to maintain her dignity despite the pain in her heart. He was at his desk, writing rapidly, and gestured for her to wait while he finished. When he finally set down his pen, he looked tired but satisfied. "The conspiracy appears to have been larger than we suspected. Master Renaud was merely one piece of a complex plot. I'm glad he was discovered before any further harm could be done," she said, pouring the tea. "Thanks to you." He accepted the cup, studying her face. "You seem troubled tonight." She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I heard you'll be announcing your betrothal at the solstice ball. I wanted to offer my congratulations." His expression shifted to one of confusion, then amusement. "And who, exactly, am I supposedly betrothing myself to?" I'm not certain." The Duchess mentioned, Understanding dawned in his eyes. "The Duchess of Lenborough has been campaigning for me to marry her niece for the past year. She's decided to force my hand through palace gossip, it seems." Relief flooded through Josephine, followed quickly by embarrassment. "I shouldn't have presumed to mention it." "On the contrary." He set down his tea and moved to stand before her. It gives me the opportunity to tell you that I have no intention of announcing any betrothal at the solstice ball. Unless... Her heart seemed to stop beating. Unless it's a betrothal of my own choosing. To someone who sees me as a man, not merely a crown. He took her hands in his. Someone who saved my life not once but twice, who challenges my mind and soothes my spirit. Your Majesty, she began, scarcely able to breathe. Zachary, he corrected gently. When we're alone, I would hear my name from your lips. Zachary. The name felt strange and wonderful. What you suggest is impossible. I'm a physician's daughter from the northern province. The court would never accept, the court will accept what their emperor decrees. His voice was firm. But more importantly, I find I cannot accept anything less than a chance at happiness. These months with you have shown me what that might look like. He released one of her hands to touch her cheek. I don't ask for an answer tonight. Think carefully. The path would not be easy, but I believe we could face it together. For 3 days, Josephine hardly slept, torn between joy and terror at the future the Emperor, Zachary, had offered. She consulted no one, knowing that any advisor would tell her it was impossible, inappropriate, doomed to failure. On the 4th day, as she brought his breakfast tray to be tasted, she found Dr. Fincher waiting with a letter bearing the imperial seal. His Majesty has been called to the northern border, the doctor explained. A rebellion has erupted. He left instructions that you're to continue your duties and your studies until his return. The letter contained only a few lines, * duty calls me away. Consider my question carefully. Whatever your answer, know that you have brought light to shadows I had come to accept as permanent. Yours, Z. * weeks passed with no word from the northern border except official dispatches indicating that fighting continued. Josephine immersed herself in her studies and maintained her vigilance over the emperor's food, which was now sent to the front lines by special courier. The Duchess of Lenborough seemed triumphant at the emperor's absence, redoubling her efforts to send Josephine away to the Western Medical Academy. His Majesty himself agreed it would be best for your education, she claimed, producing a document with the imperial seal. Josephine examined it carefully. This authorizes my training but says nothing about leaving the capital. She returned the paper with a polite smile. I believe I'll continue my current arrangements until His Majesty returns and can clarify his wishes. The Duchess's eyes narrowed. You play a dangerous game, little kitchen girl. I'm merely doing my duty, Your Grace. Josephine curtsied and withdrew, her heart pounding. The Duchess was a formidable enemy, but Josephine was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived at the palace in winter. As summer reached its height, worrying reports came from the northern border. The Emperor had been wounded in battle, though official announcements assured the public that his injuries were minor. Josephine longed to go to him, to use her medical training to tend his wounds, but such a request would raise too many questions. Instead, she wrote detailed instructions for his care, focusing on preventing infection and managing pain with herbal remedies, and convinced Dr. Fincher to include them in his dispatches to the Imperial medical team at the front. 2 days before the solstice ball, as Josephine was reviewing anatomy texts in the palace library, a commotion erupted in the corridors. Servants rushed past, whispering excitedly. She stopped a footman to ask what was happening. His Majesty has returned, the man exclaimed. Just rode through the gates, unexpected. The whole court is assembling to greet him. Josephine remained in the library, her place not being among those who would formally welcome the Emperor. Hours passed as she attempted to focus on her studies, her mind constantly straying to wonder about his condition, whether his wounds had healed properly, what his return might mean for her future. As evening fell, a royal page found her. His Imperial Majesty requests your presence in the Eastern Garden. The garden was lit with lanterns that cast a golden glow over the summer blooms. Zachary stood beside a fountain, his left arm in a sling, his face thinner than when she had last seen him. He dismissed the guards as she approached, and for a moment they simply looked at each other in the warm evening light. Your medical instructions were excellent, he said finally. The imperial surgeon was quite impressed. He asked where I had found such a knowledgeable physician. I'm glad they were helpful. She resisted the urge to examine his injury herself. How severe was the wound? Arrow through the shoulder. Clean, fortunately. He gestured to a bench with his good arm. I've had much time to think during my recovery, Josephine. About the Empire, about the future. About us. Her heart quickened at that last word. And what conclusions did you reach? That life is uncertain and precious. That duty matters, but so does happiness. He sat beside her. The rebellion is crushed, but it taught me something important. The people don't rise up against rulers they love and respect. My father ruled through fear. I've tried to rule through justice, but it's not enough. What else is needed? She asked softly. Connection. Understanding. The ability to see through others' eyes. He turned to face her fully. All things you've taught me in our evening conversations. He took her hand. I still want you by my side, Josephine. Not just as my taster or my spy or even my physician. As my wife, my empress, my partner in rebuilding this empire into something better than it has ever been. The court will object, she whispered. Let them. I am still the emperor. His voice softened. But more importantly, I am a man who has found something rare and precious, and I will not let it slip away for the sake of tradition. There will be dangers, she warned. Those who plotted against you before will see me as an easier target. Then we will face those dangers together. He raised her hand to his lips. What is your answer, Josephine Jones? Will you stand beside me, not as a shadow in the kitchen, but in the full light of day? She thought of her parents, her mother who had taught her to cook with love, her father who had taught her to heal with compassion. Both had believed in doing what was right, not what was easy. Yes, she said simply. I will. His smile was like the sunrise. Then we have an announcement to make at tomorrow's ball. And so, on the summer solstice, Emperor Zachary Carswell shocked his court and delighted his common subjects by announcing his betrothal to Josephine Jones, the quiet kitchen girl who had saved his life, his kingdom, and ultimately, his heart. The Duchess was furious, the court scandalized, and the common people enthralled by the romance of it all. But as Josephine stood beside Zachary, her hand in his, she thought not of politics or plots or poisonings, but of her mother's recipe book, still kept safely in her room, the humble beginning of a journey that had led her from the kitchen to the throne, from loneliness to love, from surviving to truly living. Are you afraid? Zachary whispered as they faced the assembled court together. No, she replied, squeezing his hand. Not anymore.